Welcome to DIY Easy Crafts and BergKnifeMaking.com. Today we're going to take a look at how to easily make Cherry Burl Hybrid Knife Handles or knife scales. So this is the finished product. This is a drop point AEBL stainless steel blade that I made. And these are the handles that we're going to be detailing on this particular show. It's a nice Cherry Burl that's hybrid with epoxy resin from Totalboat.com. So I've been playing around with a couple of Totalboat's resins. The one that I use for this particular project is their Thickset resin. The Cherry Burl was actually pieces that my friend Rick Shores gave me. He does a lot of turning wood bowls, etc. These are all stabilized with cactus juice and then hardened in an oven. But he cut them into some small pieces, which I would then be able to use for my knife handles. The finished product is going to be some cast hybrid handles, and you can do any color combination you want. For these, I kind of kept it with black and red. I thought it would just kind of go along with that Cherry Burl. So anyway, the process starts with just cleaning up the live edge on these pieces. I just used a wire, actually a brass wire brush, and got off any particles that were loose. I then mixed up the Thickset epoxy. This is a 3-to-1 mix by volume, so it's very easy to mix up. You have to stir it slowly. This is a very thin resin, and this is what you want, especially if you do not have a pressure pot. Because it's so thin, any bubbles that are in the mix very quickly and very easily rise to the surface. So you're able to create your own hybrid knife scales without the use of a pressure pot. Now, let me say the caveat to that is when stabilizing the wood, you do use a vacuum chamber, but that's a separate process. I have a link to that. I'll put it on this video. So I mixed both black dye with the resin as well as red dye separately, and then poured them into my mold. I'm using a silicone mold, and I haven't done too many of these. I've really just been experimenting with this Totalboat epoxy, so really kind of eager to see what the finished product is going to look like. The scale material itself comes out of the mold after 24 hours, and it looked really nice, but you have to let it sit for about a week before you can actually start to work on it. In the meantime, I went and finished off the blade. It's going to be a drop point stainless steel blade, AEBL. I did all the grinding on the bevels with one of our tilt table bevel grinding jigs. But I'm really not going to focus on the knife itself on this video, really just the handles. The next video that I post will kind of be an overview of the entire build. Now, I glued up the handle material just like I do any other blade, one side at a time. Then I profiled that material right on the 2x72 grinder. I then started to round over that upper edge, making it comfortable in your hand and finishing off the blade. And I do this usually with an 80 grit belt, and then I'll finish it down to 120. But when I did, I noticed some additional wormholes in the wood, in the burl, that had not gotten filled with either the cactus juice or the resin, just because they weren't exposed. Only got exposed after sanding. And this is a very easy fix. All I did was mix up a little bit more of the epoxy. I added some color to it. In this case, I just decided to use black. And then I just allowed that resin to fill in each one of those voids. And just like when I poured the original epoxy, you have to set that aside for a day or so and let that dry. You see all the voids right near the butt and also by that forward pin are completely filled in now. And then once it's dry, I can go right back to the 2x72 and kind of pick up right where I left off. So I do most of the sanding and shaping right on the 2x72. I'll use the 2-inch contact wheel on the bottom to do the inner edge. I try to get as much of it done there as possible, and then I'll go to an oscillating sander. And I usually sand with a 220, a 400, a 600, 1,000, and a 2,000. And in between each grit, I'll do hand sanding with that same grit. Now on the resins, it's really important to sand at least to 1,000, preferably 2,000, in order to get a really nice shine after you buff it. Now I do buff this material on a buffing wheel with a little compound, and then most times I'll actually go back and resand it at least to the 1,000 grit, and then buff it again. Because every time I buff it, I find some additional deep scratches. If you look real careful, that you want to get rid of. But anyway, this is the finished product. So this is a Cherry Burl Hybrid Knife handle or knife scales that were made with Totalboat Thickset epoxy. It's an epoxy that is very thin, that you don't need a pressure pot for in order to get rid of the bubbles. And I was very pleased with the end results. I hope you enjoyed this little video. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'd like to give you an invite to join us on our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making. By all means, if you want to check out some of my other knife creations, you can check out my site, bergknifemaking.com. And lastly, if you're interested in making your own knives, check out the book that Jason Northgard and I put out last year called Introduction to Knife Making, and you can find that on Amazon.com. Thank you very much.